episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needham, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi, gang. Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest, Terry Tucker, has an interesting story, as most of my guests do. He played basketball in the NCAA, but because of a knee injury then in college, as well as in high school, well, that dream kind of went out the window. He tells us about how he pleased his father and took a job in business before pursuing his dream job of being a police officer. But that's not only where our journey takes us. Terry also takes us to a point where he was diagnosed with cancer and how that changed his life. So stay tuned. When I discovered Buzzsprout, I was about 30 or 40 episodes already in, and I thought, I really think they have a lot of opportunities here and a lot of options for me to explore, but it's going to be a lot of work to move the podcast. Wrong. It was so simple. It was a click of the button and everything transferred over seamlessly. And bonus, I got a website out of it, a website that has all my social media links for the podcast, and everything in there is central in one place. What could be more convenient? I mean, honestly. Then, besides that, a couple of clicks of buttons and I'm on every major platform. It was simple. And you know, you want to build your audience. You want to be on every platform you can. And also, the other thing was analytics. The analytics were top of the line. So if you have a podcast already and you want to move it, I would highly recommend doing it with Buzzsprout. And if you're new to the podcasting business, Buzzsprout is the way to go. And right now, if you follow the link in the show notes and tell Buzzsprout we sent you, it'll get you a $20 gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, which helps support our show, and we would greatly appreciate it. The only thing is, remember, before you freak out if you don't get it after you get one paid month, it takes two before you get that Amazon gift card. So check Buzzsprout out. I'm sure you would be happy, and let's create something together and come over to Buzzsprout. Hi, Terry. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Donna. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming. This is an interview that we have tried to get done, and whether one of us had some illness, you know, there's been some issues. So I appreciate you finally connecting.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Well, let's talk about your early life. So you were telling me that you had grown up in Illinois.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You cannot tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, I have a brother who lives in Barrington, Illinois, who's 6'7" and was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. And I have another brother who's 6'6", who's been the president and principal of Marist High School on the south side of Chicago, but was also drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I kind of joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on. So, but my 5'8" mother was pretty much the boss. You know, it didn't matter how big, how tall, how strong we were, whatever mom says, that's when.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm thinking back to somebody I saw walking in the mall once when I was in high school. I don't even know how tall they were, but they actually had to duck to get into the store. And I was just like, so, you know, this is not really on topic, but how hard was life being that tall? I mean, for basketball, it's awesome, but
yeah, it was great in a lot of ways. But, you know, I was 13 years old and I was 6'5". And I had this size 14 long, narrow foot, and my ears looked like Dumbo. My head had not caught up with my ears yet. So I got teased a lot, but I just put all that, you know, frustration into basketball, and it eventually paid off with a scholarship to college.
Nice. My husband had a size 13 foot. Sometimes, depending on the shoes, sometimes 14. So I understand the pain of having a foot that big and then trying to find a normal size shoe.
Yes. Yeah, it was very difficult back in, you know, the 1970s and that.
Yeah. So why did you not pursue basketball after college?
3 knee surgeries in high school and 1 more in college.
All right. So, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I was lucky to play in college just based on the fact that I had those 3 surgeries in high school. So, yeah.
How much has basketball changed as far as since you played?
Oh, it's changed quite a bit. When I played, there was no shot clock. So University of North Carolina was famous for their 4 corners offense. They'd get a lead on you, and then they'd just spread it out and just throw it to each other and just eat the clock that way because there was no shot clock. You didn't have 30 seconds or 40 seconds, whatever it is to shoot. And when I played, there was no 3-point line. So there was no 3-point shot. And almost everybody today lives and dies by the 3-point line. So those are 2 major things that didn't exist that do exist now when I played.
If you wouldn't have had the busted up knee, would that definitely have been something you wanted to do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was pretty good and was very fortunate to get to play against people. Isaiah Thomas, who you may or may not know, I played against, went to Indiana, won a national championship, played for the Detroit Pistons, won an NBA championship. We played together in high school. I played against Michael Jordan in college my senior year, his freshman year, and that's the year that he won the national championship. And kind of a funny story, my brother who played for Notre Dame, who pitched for Notre Dame, is a basketball coach in Chicago, has been for a number of years. And at the time, he coached Loyola Academy, and he coached Michael Jordan's 2 sons. And he tells kind of a funny story. He said, one day I'm at practice and I'm teaching the players a play, and I look up and nobody's paying attention to him. So he kind of looks over to where everybody's looking, and Jordan had come into the gym just as a dad. I'm here to pick up my kids after practice and take them home. And so my brother kind of looks at him and says, "Hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind stepping out in the hall until practice is over?" And Jordan was a super guy. He's like, "Sure, coach, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be a bother to you." And my brother thought later, he said, "I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice." So
most likely. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure most people would be like, "Well, Mike, do you have any ideas for the kids?" I mean,
yeah,
you could handle it a couple of different ways.
You could. And like I said, the Jordans were great. They were, each of the parents took turns hosting the pregame meal for games. And most of them did it at their house. And when it was Jordan's turn, they had everybody over to their compound, basically, and had this catered meal inside their indoor gym. And it was just, my brother's like, "Gosh, I've been to Michael Jordan's house." It's pretty neat at the time and stuff. So it was just a great experience all the way around.
So, it sounds very amazing to be in that neck of the woods. And I understand, because I had a friend who actually, her husband owned the Wolves. Okay. And I worked with her on a TV production, but she lived not too far from Jordan. So I understand about those compounds. They are massive, and you're just like, oh, you have the security gate and everything else. And it's just kind of like, wow, okay. So once you left, where did you go? I mean, you walk away from the basketball. So where do you go from there?
So my first job out of college was actually in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. And my mom and dad were living in Ohio at the time. And so I was like, okay, I got this. And again, I'm really going to date myself. This was long before the internet was available, to find a job. So after college, I moved home to find that job. And I found that job at Wendy's, but the downside of it was I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my grandmother and my father, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. So good side, I found the job. Downside, we had the illnesses going on in the family.
But in a way, when you think about it, maybe that is exactly where you needed to be, because you got to help your mom and got to spend that last amount of time.
It was.
And when you think of Wendy's, yes, I'll date myself. I remember going to Wendy's as a kid with the beaded curtains that used to hang down to divide everything. Yep. And it was just like this magical place that you would go because the burgers were different and you had the curtains and Frosties.
Frosties are the best.
Exactly. So, and it was a different experience than it is now. So, but then the world was different too. So don't worry about dating yourself because I mean, while I'm younger than you, I date myself on here quite a bit. So you worked at Wendy's, but then I was reading your bio and somehow you ended up on the police force.
I did. And so I always wanted to be in law enforcement. My dad's dad, my grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And so he was in Chicago during Prohibition when alcohol was outlawed in the U.S. during the Great Depression in the 20s, 30s. And, when Al Capone and all those guys were shooting up the town. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It wasn't a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle, taking a homicide suspect back to the lockup. But, my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told about the knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son and come with us. Your husband's been shot. And this was the 1930s. So trauma medicine really hadn't evolved all that much at that point in time. And so when I expressed an interest to go into law enforcement, my dad was like, oh, no. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids. And my dad had my entire life planned out. But it was the life that he wanted me to lead, not the one I felt I was born to lead. So I had a choice when I graduated from college. Do I go the business route because my dad was sick and I loved him and I wanted to honor his wishes? Or do I say, sorry, Dad, I'm going to blaze my own trail and go down and be a cop? And so I kind of joke. I did what every good son did. I waited till my dad passed away and I followed my own dreams. So that's kind of how I became a rookie police officer when I was 37 years old.
And here's the thing about that. And I've talked to several people on the podcast about this. It's like we are set up with our parents' expectations of what our life should be. I'm quite amused because my mom used to tell me, she's like, I want you to go to Southern Methodist University, which is in Dallas. Mm-hmm. She's like, that's where I want you to go and da. Okay, well, I didn't go to SMU. However, I did end up in Dallas around that time in my life. So it's kind of one of those things where I guess I was supposed to be on that path in Dallas. I know why I met my first husband, but even though I didn't go to college like she wanted at that time at SMU, I did end up in Dallas. So
yeah, I think it's important. I always remember that. And so when my wife and I have one child, a daughter, and when it came time for her, she fortunately or unfortunately got my height and is 6'2", almost 6'3", and she ended up going to the Air Force Academy and is now an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force. But it was her decision. It's like, where do you want to go? And we'll support you in that regard. And after that, she went to the Air Force Academy, so they pretty much own her for 5 years, and she's doing that right now and having a good time with it, and it is a great experience. But I didn't want to be that parent that was like, you're going to do what I want you to do. You need to do what you need to do, not what I want you to do.
Well, and I think that's a very valuable and valid thing. I think too many times we get marred in what our parents' expectations are. I had a conversation with my dad when I was in my 30s. My mom was already gone. She had passed when I was in my 20s. So I asked my dad, I'm like, so Dad, are you proud of me? And it was the weirdest conversation because that's something, especially as in your 30s, you're kind of going, okay, have I made my parents proud? Are they happy with what I've done? And I remember looking at him and asking him that. And he just looks at me and says, what does it matter? What?
Wow.
What?
That's an interesting response.
I was just kind of like, well, your opinion matters. It shouldn't. But what if I fail? Well, then you pick yourself up, keep going, and dust yourself off, and you just keep going. Don't worry about it. He's like, it doesn't matter whether I'm proud of you or not. I'm just like, now, mind you, I can unpack a lot of stuff about my dad that's not perfect. So him being detached parent, it kind of makes sense, his statement. But at the time, it was just kind of one of those impactful things that, why am I so worried about pleasing someone else?
Yeah.
Because we do fall into that. We fall into that from childhood, because not only are we trying to please our parents, our grandparents, our siblings, our friends, our teachers, we're always trying to be this version of perfection.
Yeah. And we fail miserably along the route.
Yeah. But we don't cut ourselves a break for that, because somebody else has hammered into us that, well, you're a failure. Maybe not in those direct words, but so you end up becoming a rookie. So I guess the TV show The Rookie has a little feel for you.
It does, but I refuse to watch it. I'm sorry.
I haven't watched it either, but I just, I know about it. So
yes.
So you ended up as a SWAT negotiator?
I did. I started out like everybody else. I went through the academy and, ran a beat in a marked car in a uniform for almost 5 years, and then had an opportunity to go to the drug unit. And I always get that, wait a minute, you're 6'8" and you did undercover drug work. And I'm like, yeah, because in that industry, and it certainly is an industry, what motivates it is greed. And as long as you have money, it really doesn't matter how big or tall. And you have to act a little bit. I remember I was in Cincinnati, Ohio as a police officer, and I was in the drug unit, and I had one of the day shift. I was on the night shift. One of the day shift people said, "Hey, we've got these kids coming down from Dayton that want to sell you mushrooms. Would you be willing to, buy from them?" And I'm like, sure. So I posed as a professor of metallurgy at the University of Cincinnati. I didn't know anything about metal other than you leave it out in the rain and it rusts. That was about the extent of my knowledge of metal. But yeah, I met these kids in a park and, gave them $200. They gave me the mushrooms. They got back in their car, and then their life, instead of partying in downtown Cincinnati, they partied at the Hamilton County Justice Center that night.
Wow. And how, looking back, was that rewarding? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, it was what I was supposed to do with my life, and I did it, and I worked with great people, and it was a blast. I mean, do you think you make a difference, buying drugs like that? No, not really. I mean, there are, kilos of cocaine that I'm sure came into Cincinnati that, we were like a street lick kind of, we would, buy from a guy on the corner and then you jump out and bust them and take them to jail. Were we making a difference? I don't know. You like to think you were, but I'm not so sure we were.
I mean, I remember being at a club in Shreveport, and I had a cocktail, and I was picking the cherry out of the cocktail. And this guy who was at the club was just like, "You didn't do what I just think you did." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You just didn't put E in your drink." And I'm like, "No." I mean, I was that naive. It was just kind of like, no, but he was if I did that, he wanted some. It's just like, no, dude, no. Most of the time when I went to the club, I had water because I liked to dance. That's why I would go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just kind of, he was ready to get down with the E. And I'm like, nah.
Yeah, drugs is one of those things. I mean, people will do some of the most disgusting things, because they are addicted to these things. And meth was just starting to come on the scene when I was there. And, mostly what we dealt with was crack, and back then marijuana was illegal, and, things like that. And so, but just the things people would do, how they would sell their bodies for, just a small little rock that would get them high for a couple hours, and then they'd be right back at trying to get another rock or crack and stuff. It was a shame, and it was disgusting. And I did a podcast with a couple cadets at the Air Force Academy, and one of them asked me, are there services out there to help people get off drugs? And I said, yeah, there's a lot of things available to people. I said, but the problem with that is you're not going to get off drugs until you hit rock bottom. And there's a very fine line between rock bottom and dead. I've seen way too many people dead, I'll never forget. I started out as a police officer in Santa Barbara as a reserve police officer when we lived out there. And literally my first run was to a Burger King where a guy had been in prison, had gotten out. And so he had lost, he had this much of a habit. Then he went to prison. Well, his tolerance decreased. Well, he came back, got out on the street, scored a rock of crack cocaine, put it in his arm, and dropped dead right there on the toilet in the Burger King, because his body wasn't able to tolerate that much crack, because he'd been in jail for a number of months and it kind of detoxed from it. So that was my very first run of somebody dead on the toilet in a Burger King.
Wow. My dad's version of a just say no speech was, "I've tried everything. Don't do it." Okay. And it wasn't until I was older that I found out that my dad actually had a Percocet addiction at one point in the 80s. And so this is way before the opioid crisis. We already had opioid crises and people didn't even acknowledge it. And as far as potency, so, pot is legal. And my husband, because of his depression and everything, they said, well, you need to go ahead and you're on the maximum dose of antidepressant. So go ahead and do pot. Okay. Well, the pot that he was used to smoking back in the 80s, the Indiana ditchweed, as he would call it, was not that strong. So now he goes to pick up some medical marijuana and he takes a toke and he takes another toke, takes a couple of tokes because it would take 5 or 6 tokes apparently with the old stuff. I'm not really a pot smoker. So there you go. I've done edibles, I admit, but not a smoker. So I remember he had about 4 or 5 tokes and he's just like, I'm going to go upstairs and write. He's like, no, I need you to stay here with me. I'm like, excuse me? I need you to stay here with me. I'm like, why? He goes, just hold my legs down because I feel like I feel like everything's pixelated. He was tripping hard and he was tripping so hard that he ended up throwing up.
Okay.
So people, I'm not against pot because I know pot can do a lot of things for people that are in pain and other things, but you got to know your limits. And like you were saying, here you are, somebody who hasn't, used pot in years suddenly is using it. And it's like, it's not the same strength. It's not what your body can tolerate anymore.
Right.
So I get it. I completely understand. So as a hostage negotiator, how intense was that?
Pretty intense. Think about it. I mean, if you're talking to me, you're probably having the worst day of your life. The thing about being a policeman is 99.9% of everything we did was face to face with another human being, whether we were pulling them over, to give them a ticket for speeding or whether we were responding to a radio run for a fight or whatever. I mean, it's people to people and you can take visual clues from what people are doing. So if you're talking to somebody and they're kind of like, looking around, maybe they're going to run on you. Or, if they're sitting there and they're balling up their fists, maybe they're going to want to fight you. And you can see that, from a visual point of view, and you can do something about it. You can sit them down, you can handcuff them, you can put them in your car, whatever is appropriate for why you're engaging them in the first place. But as negotiators, we didn't have that luxury. That person wasn't with us. I mean, the best we could hope for was to negotiate with somebody through a door. They're on the other side of a door. But most of the time we were a block or two away on the phone doing that. So you have to figure out what's going on based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And I always describe what we did kind of like a teeter-totter or a seesaw, at the park. When we started negotiating with the person, their emotional brain was way up in the air and their rational brain was sort of down on the ground. And, people always said, you talked people out. Really what we did is we listened people out because we would just ask an open-ended question and then let them burn off as much of that emotional energy as we could. So you would hope to get the teeter-totter to at least equilibrium and hopefully get it to the point where their rational brain was way up in the air and their emotional brain was down on the ground. Because let's face it, we make better decisions in a rational state than we do in an emotional state. So yeah, it was pretty intense. And about 90% of the time, we were successful in, either getting the barricaded person out or getting the hostage out and the person out. But about 10% of the time, the person made the decision to end their life. And while that's always tragic, I didn't lose any sleep over it because I knew I did the best I could. I had great training, worked with great people. And let's face it, what I was being asked to do is solve a problem or mitigate a problem that in many cases had been 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the making. And here, go in and solve this problem in 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. Not very realistic, but we did the best we could.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, I had my mom, she committed suicide. And the thing about that is she had tried it many a times throughout my life, my childhood, my teenage years. So ultimately she was on a mission. So like you're saying, 20, 30, 40 years, if this person is on a mission, some people will snap and do something abruptly. And those are the people most likely that you could talk down. But somebody that has been in chronic situations over and over and over again, they're on a mission. They're going to ultimately do it because they can't find that peace inside that is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget this guy I was negotiating with one night. He wanted to kill himself, and so he slit his wrist. Well, that didn't work for him. So I don't know where he got this idea. He turned the gas on and put his head in the oven. Well, that didn't kill him either. So eventually he ends up calling a relative, and the relative calls the police, and the police get there, and then we get called. And I'm talking to him now. He's got a gun. And I mean, it's like 4:00 in the morning. And in all honesty, I think he was just exhausted. And he's like, I want to come out. I'm like, okay. I said, put the gun down and come out. I said, when you come out, I'll come down and we'll talk face to face. And he's like, I'd really like that. I said, but bring the phone with you. Don't hang up the phone. Well, he did. He hung up the phone. But I didn't think a lot of that because we're conditioned that when a conversation ends, we hang up the phone. All of a sudden, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and he's like, we heard a gunshot. I thought, you got to be kidding. You didn't. He did. He shot himself in the head, but he shot himself in the head. So on an angle with the gun. So the bullet went underneath his skin, around his scalp, and out the other side. It never penetrated his brain. It never penetrated his skull. And I'm thinking, man, that's three times you tried to kill yourself. I'm telling you, God's not done with you yet. You got more to do. So, while it was tragic, you're right. It was this guy was on a mission. He wanted to kill himself, but God was like, nope, don't think so. Not today.
That's like that case that happened in California where the chef killed his girlfriend and then decided to take a flying leap off a cliff to kill himself. And he survived, like broke a ton of bones, but he survived.
Yeah.
It's like, nope, sorry. And
not your time.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, when, and I know you're dealing with this, and I've dealt with this because my husband we were told he was on borrowed time. And the fact of the matter is, even when you're told that, you still have no concept. I mean, I remember when he had his bypass in 2010, our primary care doctor's like, oh, you'll last 5 years. That's about it. He lasted almost 10. So, and even like I said, and I know you know this, and this is something we're getting to now is, even when somebody tells you you're on borrowed time, they don't know. So you deal with the anxiety and the stress constantly building of, is this that moment? When is that moment? At least as a caregiver, family member, those are the things that play out. And I'm sure your family has some of these issues. So let's talk about, so you leave the police force, or were you still with the police force when you were first diagnosed with cancer?
I was actually, I had moved on. We were living in Texas at the time. And I had my own school security consulting business. And I was also coaching girls high school basketball. I was actually coaching my daughter at the time. So yeah, I was a basketball coach, and I had this callus break open on the bottom of my foot right below my third toe. And, as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. So initially I didn't give it much thought, but after a couple of weeks when it didn't heal, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But he sent it off to pathology. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having telling me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just kind of laid it out. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And I recommend you go to MD Anderson in Houston and be treated for that. And so I did. And, I had the bottom of my foot excised, cut out, and I had all the lymph nodes in my groin removed. And when I healed, my oncologist put me on a drug called interferon. And basically what interferon gave me was severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection of the drug. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And that wasn't a cure. That was just to keep the disease from coming back. 2017, the drug became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which usually isn't compatible with being alive, but I survived that as well. As soon as the drug was stopped, the cancer immediately came back in the exact same place on my foot. And after a while of trying a few things that didn't work, 2018, I had my left foot amputated. 2019, the disease worked its way up my leg into my shin, and I had 2 more surgeries. And then last year, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it broke my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm being treated for now. Now, on that uplifting story, what's your next question?
Well, I was going to say I'm a little familiar with the shots because my father-in-law had prostate cancer and he was on Lupron.
Okay.
So he was on Lupron shots. So I kind of understand the shots. As far as what you went through and you're going through, as I said before you started, I feel for your family because I know what it's like. And even though one of my husband's biggest fears, because he was a type 1 diabetic, was to be, as he would put it, picked apart. So I know how hard. I don't personally know, but I can imagine how hard this is for you, especially being the active person that you are.
Yeah, I had a nurse recently asked me, what was it like to have your foot cut off and your leg cut off, and I'm in a wheelchair now. I'm still learning how to walk again. It's much different learning to walk when you're 6'8" and than when you were just a little kid and you'd fall over and laugh about it and stuff like that. You fall over now, you get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I remember telling her, I said, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are. That's who we all are. This is just a house or a vessel or whatever you want to call it to house who we are. So, while it certainly has not been easy and I'm still working through it, I just look at it like that, take whatever you want because you're never going to be able to touch who I am.
It isn't, you say something very valid there because so many of us, especially with social media, get trapped up in the physical. We get trapped up in making sure that, oh, look at the makeup tutorial. Oh, look at the clothes I'm wearing. Oh, look at this. Look at that. It's not so much about the heartfelt message or the person's soul. It comes down to the simple question of, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm fine. Did you actually ask the person the real question? Are you going to stop and follow that up, or are you just going to let it go?
Yeah.
And I think with the way, that goes back to you being the hostage negotiator. Is that person in that situation because nobody has heard them?
Yeah, I think that's one thing as a police officer. If you're really good at your job and you understand it, you have to understand that, I may pull you over on a traffic stop. And for me, it's the 3rd traffic stop of the day. For you, it's the most scary thing that's happened to you all year. And, when you realize that everybody you come in contact with, whether it's, the prostitute or, the drug addict or whoever it is, somewhere they have somebody that loves them, whether it's a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a grand, whatever it is. And as long as you remember that, it makes them more of a person and less as a collar. It's somebody I arrested and we took to jail. Well, and then there's the opposite, the idiots who are, on your last nerve yelling and screaming at you like, well, let's see, I'm going home and sleep in my bed tonight. You're going to sleep on concrete. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is the prognosis? You can't take the shots. So what are they doing to help you maintain your health?
So I am on a clinical trial right now, have been on it for about 14, 15 months. There were 7 of us that started on this drug. 4 people, it didn't work at all, and they were immediately taken off and on something else. 3 of us, it did have some positive impact on. And we were all we knew each other. We were getting the treatment at the same time, seeing the doctor at the same time. And over the last couple months, I have lost both of them. They both passed away because the drug stopped working for them and the disease came back and killed them. I am still in what they call a stable state. The tumors in my lungs have shrunk by about 30%. They are not going away. This drug is probably not going to save my life, but it may save somebody else's life, 5-10 years from now. And that's kind of what I look at when I go through all this garbage, when I shake and I throw up and I have a fever and I feel, it's like, what, this is bigger than me. This might help somebody else down the road. And if that's the case, then, my legacy is going to be that much better because I helped somebody that I didn't even know.
How has your family dealt with all this?
Interestingly, like I said, it's just my daughter and I remember when I had my leg amputated, I went to my oncologist and he was like, I want to start you on chemotherapy. And I was like, is it going to save my life? And he's like, probably not. I said, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm not sure I want to go through all this ugliness and, for the same outcome that, I'm going to have anyway, but I'll go home and talk to my family. So I go home and, I'm telling my wife and daughter and my daughter's immediately, all right, hey, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. What do you mean a family meeting? And so, all right, we go to the kitchen table and we sit around and talk about how we all feel about this. And my daughter's like, all right, how many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute, am I getting outvoted here to have chemotherapy? But I remember back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we love the most to class. And we were to look at that photograph while we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, because he reasoned that you'll fight harder for the people you love than you'll fight for yourself. And I think that was a classic example of it. I ended up taking chemotherapy, and chemotherapy bought me time to get on this clinical trial drug. So, in hindsight, it was a good move, but at the time, it wasn't something I wanted to do.
Now, is your wife still part of the picture? Because you said just it's you and your daughter.
Oh, no, it hurt too. Yeah. I mean, my wife and daughter, yes, we want dad and husband to take chemotherapy. And I'm like, yeah, my wife and I have been married for 28 years. And, the funny thing about the relationship with my wife and I is when we got married, she had never seen the inside of an emergency room. And I remember there was a time before I had my foot amputated where they were literally cutting a part out of the bottom of my foot in an outpatient procedure. And my wife and the doctor are down at the end of the table and they're just talking and the doctor's cutting this out and she's acting like it's no big deal at all. And I'm like, man, 28 years ago, you couldn't have done that. You would have been like, oh, no, I'm out of here for that. So.
I totally understand. I watched my husband get lasered. I watched them take a port out, which the doctor's like, oh, we'll take the port out. It's dialysis port. We'll take the dialysis port out in the office. It'll be like a 10-minute procedure. Well, the doctor didn't consider that it had been a year in there. So I'm there watching. I wasn't that close. I was across the room because, you got to be sanitary. But I'm watching him cut this out. And my husband, because they did a topical and just a couple of injections. But yeah, it hurt like anything. And all the surgeries. And a couple of our friends actually used to joke that we needed either an ambulance or a medical caduceus on the car because of the fact that we were at the doctors or the hospital so much.
I understand that. I totally get it. Yeah, I totally get it.
And most people that live a normal life don't understand that. But at a certain point, when you're dealing with somebody that's got a lot of health issues, that's your life. You're going to the doctor's office, like, okay, now what? Well, we got this doctor's appointment. We got this doctor's appointment. And, it becomes part of your life. And then as we age, that's something that becomes prevalent. And you start talking about your illnesses with your friends, even though when you made a joke of it when you were a kid listening to the older ladies talking about it, it's like, oh, yeah, right, whatever. I'll never do that. Oh, yes, you will.
Yeah. I still have friends and even neighbors that, if the subject comes up, they're like, no, don't want to talk about that. Don't want to, when I had my leg amputated before the surgery, I went to the cemetery, I went to the mortuary, I went to the church and I planned my funeral. And I got some brushback from that, because I talk a lot about motivation and, keep going and stuff like that. And people were like, don't you think that's kind of defeatist? And I was like, well, last time I checked, we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. And, it's everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And I remember there was a Native American Blackfoot proverb that I heard years ago that went like this. It's like, when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. Wow. That's what I want.
Nice. And let's be honest, you making those arrangements are not for you so much as it is to take the stress off your family. Yeah. I mean, we don't prepare for death. Death is such a weird thing. And that's what I was telling my therapist. I'm into a year and a half. At the end of the month, it'll be a year and a half since my husband passed. And the first year you're sitting there and you're counting and you're going through all these milestones. And then when you hit that second year, it's kind of like, this is the reality, and there's a hole. And I'm sure for your family, and I know you're here and you're fine. Well, you're not fine, but you know what I mean. You're happy. You seem to be happy. You seem to be functioning. But the fact is, when you're gone, there will be that hole.
Yeah. I mean, there was when my dad died, it was horrible. And you're right. There's always those anniversaries, the first Christmas, the first Thanksgiving, the first birthday, the first of everything. And you're just, this sucks, and it does. But I think the great thing about life is that the longer the person's gone, all the negative and the ugly and the times you hurt that person kind of fades away. And what you're left with are the good times, the fun times, the things that put a smile on your face that you laugh about. And that's what's, it's going to suck initially, but we all go through it. We all you've experienced it, and it sucks, but you embrace the suck and you keep moving forward. Well,
and about 2 weeks before he died, he's like, can you start cleaning out my old clothes in the guest room that I'm not going to use? And that kind of was just, I'm like, I went to start doing it and I went back in our bedroom and I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. He says, why? I said, because it feels like you're not here. Yeah. I was like, no, just do it. So I did this. And then I did it the following weekend. And there was a shirt that said, he was a jokester, and he had a shirt that said, fear me, for I have the power to destroy you. And I remember walking back into the bedroom and saying, do you want the shirt? And he looked at me and he's like, no, because I don't have that power anymore. And I did not realize how prophetic that would be. So I put it in a bag and loaded it in the car. And the next morning I dropped him off at dialysis, and I dropped the bag off at Savers. And then he would die that night. So sometimes I think in a roundabout way, we're being nudged to be prepared, to be in a certain situation. But let's talk something a little positive now, since we've dealt with So you wrote a book called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life.
I did.
So tell me about it.
So the book was really born out of two conversations that I had. One was with a former player that I had coached that had moved to Colorado. And my wife and I had dinner with her and her fiance. And I remember saying to her one night, I'm really excited that you're living close because I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth and then living that reason. So that was one conversation. Another one was with a young man in college who reached out to me on LinkedIn. And he said, what do you think are the things I should know to not just be successful in my job or in business, but in life overall? And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others kind of stuff. Not that those aren't important. They are, but I kind of felt they'd been done a lot. And so I was like, well, maybe I can come up with something different, something a little more deep, something that might resonate in his soul. So I spent some time and I wrote some notes, and eventually I had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I kind of stepped back and I was like, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally in the 3-month period between the time I had my leg amputated and the time I started chemo for the tumors in my lungs, while I was healing, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
So one of them is control your mind or it will control you.
Yeah, most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. Absolutely. And, and it's always fun for me as an author when people read the book, because there's always one principle, and the principles are not in any order. One is not any more important than number 7 or anything, but there's always one that resonates with the reader. And it's fun for me to see which one that is for people, because for me, it's that one. Most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their mind. And it resonates with me because I've done it. I think we've probably all done it. Ooh, I want to do that, but that kind of scares me a little bit. That makes me uncomfortable. And I always tell people, especially now, I think you ought to do one thing every day that scares you, that makes you uncomfortable, that could be potentially embarrassing for you. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but you should do at least one thing every day. Because if you do that with the small stuff, when the big stuff hits, and you and I have both experienced the big stuff, when you lose somebody close to you, you lose your job, you end up, living in your car, you're going to be able to handle those a whole lot better than somebody who's like, I don't know what to do here. Well, if you do it every day, you'll know exactly what to do. You may not get it right, but you'll figure it out along the way.
But I think the fear base comes from, as you're saying, being willing to embarrass yourself. The fact of the matter is, my generation, your generation, we were told, no, you can't go out looking like that. You look like a fool. You can't act like that. You look like you're acting like a fool. There was always this embarrassment of not us, but them. And when you look at people on TikTok, anything and everything goes. Nobody cares what they're saying. And it's just like, the filter's off.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I'm not sure that's.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's a good thing either.
No. I think back to, what team sports, I started playing basketball when I was 9 years old and played all the way up, until I graduated from college. And I think one thing that team sports teaches you is the importance of being part of something bigger than yourself. If you let, you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, your parents down, et cetera. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And, we all tend to think that, it's all about me. I hate to tell you this. It's not about you. Nobody cares about you. If you want something in life, you better go get out there and go get it, because life owes you absolutely nothing. And life's not fair, and it never will be fair. And anybody who ever told you it would be fair is nuts. So I kind of look at what are you part of? And, us singularly can do nothing. Us collectively can do anything. And I wish we would get back to the point where we cared more about each other than we cared about ourselves. But right now, it seems to be, hey, whatever I think, I'm the most important thing in the world. I finished last. Give me a trophy. Well, sorry, the real world doesn't work that way.
Well, I think social media has kind of egged that on. When I look at the very first job I ever had that paid was McDonald's. And at the time, so this is 1984, at the time, McDonald's was all about teamwork. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a lot of automation. We had to work as a team, especially working in drive-thru. And then I went to Eckerd's, and then I went to Chuck E. Cheese. This is back when Chuck E. Cheese was primarily video games. It did have some of the TV stuff, and it did have a ball crawl, but the thing is, I started out as a birthday hostess, and I ended up becoming a team leader and then a manager, assistant manager. And the whole fact of the matter was, when I started there, the birthday hostesses did not help each other. It was like, I'm done with my party, whatever. Yeah. And I would help other people because McDonald's had instilled in me, you are a team and you need to work as a team. So that's most likely why I got moved to the positions I did, because I understood that. But getting other people to understand that, it was just like foreign to them. It's like, yeah, that's not your table, but help out.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't do that. It's all about us, and like I say, I've always, my daughter and I were talking about this the other day. I will support your right to say that, you know what, I'm a toaster. Okay, you're a toaster. I absolutely support your right to call yourself a toaster, but don't make it my problem when I don't acknowledge you as a toaster. It's like, I'm sorry, you're a woman. You want to be a toaster, but it's not my fault. And this whole thing of, life owes me something. You have to, kowtow to whatever I say. It's like, no. I mean, I can't wait till somebody in authority or power stands up and say, no, that's just stupid. That's just totally stupid. You can be whatever you want. That's fine. But don't insult me by saying, I've got to be, you've got to be like, I've got to be the person who says that you're that person. You're not. You're a woman. You want to call yourself a toaster, that's fine. But I'm not going to go down that route. Sorry.
What we're having is just this wild pendulum swing.
Yeah.
From one extreme to another. And there's no common ground. And that's the problem. We need some kind of common ground to put us all on a playing field that is level. We have such extreme views. And if someone has an extreme view and you don't have the same view, you're going to just start shouting at each other. And here's the thing. You're not going to change that person's opinion. And that's really, when you think of the toxicity of social media, that is where it is, because, well, you said something, I don't like it, I'm going to go after you, and then I'm going to try to blow it up so I can get some likes.
Yeah. We're not comfortable enough with ourselves as we are. We have to try to express that on social media by putting other people down. So if I put you down, then I somehow elevate myself. Well, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in the real world. I remember my brother, the basketball coach, was telling a story. He has an assistant coach who is in private industry. And one day he's sitting in his office and the partner of his firm walks in and says, hey, who's, Sally Sue? It's like, well, she's this new woman we hired right out of college. Why? Is there a problem? He said, no. She said, but her mother's on the phone with me right now wanting to know why Sally Sue isn't going to be able to come home for Christmas. It's like, well, she doesn't have any vacation time yet, so she's going to have to, He's like, oh, I know. He said, so I'm going to get back on the phone and tell the mom that Sally Sue absolutely can be home with you for Christmas, but Sally Sue won't have a job when she comes back. It's this. Well, my parents, your parents would have never thought to get on the phone with our employer and say, I want my kid home for,
no.
It's like, I'm sorry, that wasn't even thought of. It's like, you know what? Yeah, you're not going to make it home. I mean, when I was playing college basketball, I never made it home for Thanksgiving. I made it home for a couple days at Christmas. I mean, my parents didn't call up the coach and say, hey, I want my son to be here for 2 weeks. My coach would have been like, fine, let him be there for 2 weeks. He's not on my team anymore.
No, and to be honest, okay, so here's a prime example. When I was starting a job in January, and I knew that my dad had planned this trip for the whole family in February. Mm-hmm. So before I started the job, I talked to my boss and I explained, this is the situation I'm in. Can I have this time off? And they're like, okay. Yeah. And if they would have said no, then I wouldn't have gone, but right. It was okayed. And that's the thing. It's like, there's a couple of things that we don't teach in school anymore. Critical thinking is one. And the fact that we go back to, everybody gets a trophy. Nobody knows how to listen to rules. And while I think that some rules need to be changed, I'm not going to get into that, but I think there's so many that people are just going, well, whatever. I don't have to listen.
Yeah.
I'm going to be me. I'm going to do me. And I don't have to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the problem. I mean, fine, do you. I've got no problem with that. Like I said, I'll support you till the end of the earth for you to do you, but I don't have to do you too. You want to do your thing. That's great. But you can't say that there's something wrong with me because I don't necessarily agree with you. And, that's one thing as a hostage negotiator that, and I actually, there's a chapter in my book about the importance of listening, and everybody's like, oh, that's kind of common sense. No, it's not today, and it's not the importance of listening to respond. It's the importance of listening to understand. And that's the problem. And as you said, we're screaming at each other. And when you're screaming at me and I'm screaming at you, nobody's hearing each other.
No.
And we're not getting anything accomplished. But what if we sat down and said, okay, Donna, yeah, I hear what you said. Let's talk about that. I may agree with that. I may not agree with that. But where are you coming from with that? If we can start to do that, then we're on the road to getting to a point where we can come together. And like I said, we can do anything when we're together. We can't do anything when we're by ourselves.
Well, and let's be honest. Let's look at a bigger picture. Are there people that are going to benefit from all of us being distracted by yelling at each other?
I hear you.
I mean, if I'm sitting here yelling about this and you're yelling about this, can we put through things that we're not even aware of that's happening?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I'm not being conspiracy theorist. I'm being legit. I mean, when you think about, we were talking about fear earlier. If you turn on the news, rarely do you maybe at the end of the news, you'll see the touchy-feely story, but you've been bombarded for the last 25 minutes with fear, death, toxic, finances are ruined, on and on and on and on. So by the time you're done with that half hour, when we give you the little puppy story, it's cute and cuddly, but your mind is so oversaturated. I mean, so hubby was sick. The pandemic's going on. The news is on, and I've talked about this prior, but the news is on. I'm like, I'm going upstairs now. I'm going to go right. I don't want to watch the news. I don't want to hear how many people have died. I don't want to hear this. And he would sit there and he'd watch and he'd bawl his eyes out. So for me, I removed myself from the situation. For him, he embraced it. So you have to decide whether, I'm not saying check out and not pay attention to what's going on in the world, because we need to, but you have to look at it from a different perspective. You have to look at the news now is more for infotainment. It's not the Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather. It's not those guys that are serious news guys. This is more about infotainment. I mean, certain channels, let's have all the women look the same. Yeah. I mean, it's about ratings and money. And that's the big thing. If we can keep you ginned up and ticked off at each other, then we can do whatever the hell we want. Excuse me for cursing, but.
No, I think you're right. And I learned that, that I think you need to be, critical thinking. You mentioned that earlier. We don't teach that anymore. And one thing I learned when I was a policeman, before I left the police department, I was a sergeant. And I remember I was on the scene of this incident one night, and I work nights, and I got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I go home, and my wife has the television on. She's getting breakfast ready for our daughter and her, and I'm looking at it. And I'm like, she's like, man, that was really bad. Were you there last night? I said, yeah, I was there. What they're saying didn't happen. It did not happen. I was there. That did not happen, and yet they're reporting on it. And I think that drove home for me the understanding that the news is going to say whatever they want. Like you say, these are not, I'm going to give you the facts, and I'm going to let you as a citizen decide how you want to interpret those facts. I like it. I don't like it. Whatever you end up doing. Now they're telling you this is what happened. Well, no, that's not what happened, because I was there. So you have to balance. It's like, well, if you're going to watch Fox here, then I guess maybe you need to watch CNN over here, and have a balance in between of what maybe or maybe not is the truth. Because I never take anything at face value on the internet, on the news. I'm like, I'm going to go research this, read a lot about it, and then I'm going to form my opinion. I never take that on face value anymore.
Well, if you look at the guy driving into the crowd at the Christmas parade, it was reported that it was an accident. No. Okay. So then I've skewed your public opinion on that, because I've said it was an accident. No, it was an intentional act. You unpack this. Now here's where I think part of the reason why the news would stay away from the intentional act, because working in insurance, an intentional act can be denied. So everybody that was injured in that intentional act wouldn't have coverage. So maybe that's why they decided to run it that way. But you're skewing public opinion right off the bat because you're saying it was an accident. No, an accident is somebody who passed out at the steering wheel because they had a diabetic problem and they drove through the crowd. That is an accident.
Right. I totally agree.
That's the thing. We have a perception problem in this country that I can paint you however. And then with the technology, I can edit you down to make a statement and take you totally out of context.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love, you speak for 2 hours and, and the news picks out, a 5-second clip and all of a sudden you're an idiot now. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what I said. And that's not within context. And again, I'm sure Edward R. Murrow would kind of roll over in his grave if he, the Edward R. Murrow, right? I'm like, you're a talking head. That's all you are. Yeah. You're not a serious journalist, and stop thinking you are, because you're not.
Well, if you look at the 1990s, there was a movie called Wag the Dog. And it talked about how they created a story. They created a war that really wasn't happening. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not talking conspiracy theories. Yeah. But the general principle of we can change and form your opinion. If you're not capable of critical thinking, we can paint a narrative for you to follow.
Right.
And it's much easier.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the book because I know we're kind of going a little. Embrace the pain and suffering we all experience in life and use it to make you stronger and more determined individual. And I think I'm going to say this from personal experience. I think that has made me who I am. I mean, a lot of people go, well, you've been through a lot. How did you handle it? Well, I wouldn't be me if I didn't go through it. That's the thing. I don't think people look at those things from the outside. The person that's going through it, you don't think anything different because it's your life. So
it really is. And that's, I guess the way I look at it is, we're all going to experience pain in our lives. And it doesn't have to be, diabetes and heart disease like you experienced. It doesn't have to be cancer. It doesn't even have to be health related. I mean, you could flunk a test at school or break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or, not get the promotion at work that you think you deserve. Pain is inevitable. We're going to experience it in life. That's just part of life. But suffering is optional. Suffering is what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you stronger and tougher and more determined? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? Again, it goes back to it's a choice. The world doesn't owe you anything. If you want to, have a little pity party about your circumstances, the world's not going to say, oh, no, we're going to get you up and keep you moving forward. It's going to let you have your little pity party. So that's fine. But that's why I always say, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And you and I have both been, through that. And I think, and this is going to sound kind of weird, I'm not sure I'd change my cancer diagnosis. I think cancer has made me a better person, a better individual, a stronger individual.
Well, and here's the thing, doing what you did, seeing people die, seeing people that are in a bad way, and doing what I did as an intern. I mean, people are like, oh, intern's not a big deal. I remember I worked motorcycle claims, and this woman had bought her husband a motorcycle for their anniversary, their wedding anniversary. And she was telling me how she would let, sometimes he would take the son out on the back of the bike and how he loved this. And he made sure he had all the safety courses and everything and how he just absolutely loved the bike. And they would go occasionally out on him. And he was driving this guy. There was a van stopped in front of this other car that he couldn't see. The guy decided to pass the van on the shoulder and kicked up all these rocks and dirt. So he didn't know that this truck was stopped or the van was stopped. And he ended up losing his leg all the way. And listening to her talk about the joy, but then talking about, I wish I would have never made that choice. I wish I would have never bought that bike. She started blaming herself for his suffering. And it wasn't her choice. It wasn't anything she did. It wasn't anything he did. It was a fact of circumstance that there was nothing around that could have changed, except for that guy not going around.
Yeah, and I've certainly been asked, who do you blame? I mean, that's another great thing that we love to do. We've got to, we're not comfortable, with taking ownership of our own success and happiness. Whenever it doesn't happen, we got to blame somebody or something. There's got to be something that we've got to point to that it's their fault. And It's not. I mean, people ask me, do you blame God because you got cancer? I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning and, looked at his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer? No, I don't think God did that at all. It just happened. And, a couple summers ago, I had all my genes, I had some genetic testing done of all 88 genes that doctors either know or suspect cause all different forms of cancer, from lung cancer to bladder cancer to, eye cancer. And I have absolutely no mutations in any of my genes when it comes to cancer. So you certainly begs the question, well, why did I get this disease? And my oncologist is like, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. You do. You have it. And, you get to a point where it's like, yeah, you're right. I've got it. These are the cards that I've been dealt, and I've got to play those cards to the best of my ability. And that's what I do.
And that's a good way to look at things. I mean, what you say is very true, because once again, going back to the insurance, I mean, I learned very early on within the first week of my job, nobody wants to take responsibility for their actions.
No.
Nobody. And, that's the one thing about an accident, and whether it be cancer, which that's not an accident, but certain life events happen and they're put there to teach us things. Mm-hmm. And you can, one split second, I always look back at, we were moving to this house and I had this doll case. I was carrying this doll case out and the glass top fell off and fell and shattered on the stoop. And my husband's like, oh, just leave it. I'm like, no, there's kids in the neighborhood. So no. So took care of it, cleaned it up, put it in the car, and we go off to come up here. And on the way here, we get stopped at a red light. And the light turned yellow and I hit my brakes. And somebody rear ends us. He's doing about 60. We had a RAV4, so he bounced off the tire. We didn't have a lot of damage, but we still had about 7,000. So it was a good impact. But here's the thing, and I know you're like, well, why are you saying this? The thing is, had we not been there, had I not stopped to pick up that piece of glass, there was a kid who entered the intersection almost as soon as the light turned green. This guy would have T-boned him, most likely killed him or seriously injured him. So you have to stop and look at things. I mean, there was one time we were at a stoplight and I remember going, oh, look, there's a Barbie dream house. I always wanted a Barbie dream house when I was a kid. And I was still looking at it, the light turned green and it was a 35-mile-an-hour zone, the cross street. This 18-wheeler comes barreling through about 50. We would have been killed. So it's like, you have to sit there and look at one move and we would have been dead. And I don't think we ever look at that. We're like, oh, well, no, there's always these little moments that you have to stop and that can alter life.
Yeah.
And I don't think we look at those very often anymore because we don't have the time to. We're always constantly bombarded with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything comes at us. Social media has been great in a lot of ways, but in other times it just doesn't allow us to wind down, decompress, get away, be quiet. There's too much noise.
So how do you, because I'm sure there are times when you have depression, how do you get past that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I'm not wearing a cape or anything like that. I'm a human being. I have bad days. I cry, I get down, I get depressed. And when I do, I remember two stories. And these work for me. I'm not going to say they're going to work for everybody, but they work for me. The first one was a study that I had read about back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University, where a professor performed a very simple experiment. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the rats would basically tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And right as they were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, let them rest for a while, and then he put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Wow. Think about that. First time, 15 minutes. That's all I can do. I'm worn out. I'm exhausted. I'm going to drown. Second time, 60 hours, which says to me two things. One, the importance of hope in our lives. We've got to believe that, we're working towards something better, or our life is going to get better if we continue down this road. And two, just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. And the second part of that story is I have a friend who is a former Navy SEAL, some of the toughest individuals in the world, and they talk about their 40% rule. And basically what that is, if you're at the end of your rope and for them, you can't run another step or swim another lap or do another push-up, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left to give to yourself. So whenever I get down and, feel dark and gloomy, I remember those stories and they kind of like, no, hey, dummy, you can keep going, get up and keep moving forward. So whenever I get in those situations, I remember those two stories. They work for me. If they work for you, that's great. If not, find a couple more stories to keep you moving forward.
Well, and that's the thing, when my mom, I remember when she was going to do it in the car, I was 16. She was going to, she went out to the car in the garage and was going to start the car. And I'm calling the paramedic. She had already taken pills at this point. Okay. So she's already got the pills in her system. And I'm like, I'm going to call the paramedics. And she's like, no. I'm like, look, you don't know. And this is even after that moment, years later, I'm still giving her the same pep talk of, you don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. Granted, she didn't care to find out, but that's the thing. You don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. You don't know that you might meet the best person in the world tomorrow, and I want to go back to touch on something real quick. You talked about how we always have these other things in our head that we're not paying attention to. I read cards, and the reading I do, I use a card that is the focus point of the reading. And the reason I'm telling you this is I will have people sit down and they're looking at something and they're like, well, I get a new guy in my life. And the funny thing is that focus point on that card is something totally irrelevant. I actually had a woman that I read for that I read for her kids kept coming up and she wanted to know about this man. She's upset with me because I'm talking about her kids and how her kids are doing this and everything. And she's like, I want to know about this man. I'm like, look, it's really late. She drained me when I was reading her. And I'm like, it's really late. I'll come back and read you another time. She's like, okay. And she was an older lady. So I went to the grocery store a couple of days later, and I saw one of her friends and she's like, yeah, everything's okay and whatnot. About 2 months later, she saw me again at the grocery store. And the client had been in my mind a lot. I had tried reaching out, but I never got anything. So it's when I see the lady, she tells me, she's like, I need to tell you that such and such passed. She got sick like 2 days after you talked to her. And she ended up dying of pneumonia. So I'm like, and this is the reason I brought this up is because, so here's somebody who was so focused on finding out this man, when really here's this message about your kids are going to be okay. So I think that's the whole point of this. It's like we're so focused sometimes on the wrong things in our life that we have to focus on the bigger picture.
Yeah, and we tend to see what we want to see. If you're looking for something bad, you're probably going to find it. As opposed to if I'm looking for something positive, you're probably going to find that too. So it's kind of, what are you looking for? That's probably what you're going to see.
Perception is an amazing thing.
It is.
Well, I think I've taken up more than enough of your time and I appreciate the conversation. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to add?
I will end this with a story. And I've always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. And 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it.
I will say this before you start. That was my husband's favorite movie.
Outstanding. I love it too. I mean, whenever it's on, I don't care where it is, I'll sit down and watch it. So 1993, this movie comes out and it stars Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday. And Kurt Russell's a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made up characters for the movie. And Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt Earp was a lawman, had been a lawman his entire life. So these two men from entirely opposite backgrounds formed this very strong and close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from my house. The real Doc Holliday died in that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, he has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And in this scene at the end, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all I ever wanted. And he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. Donna, you and I both know people who are sitting out there that are like, you know what? When this happens, I'll have a normal life. When that happens, I'll have a successful life. When this happens, I'll have a significant life. I guess what I would say is don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth and live it. Because if you do, I'm going to promise you two things. At the end of your life, you're going to be a whole lot happier and you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
Mm-hmm. And I want to piggyback off that real quick about one thing. After my husband passed, I realized after a certain few months, it's like, this is your new normal. It doesn't mean it's normal life. It's my new normal.
Yeah.
I do have something I want to add to that's just ridiculous. So Public Enemies was the movie with Johnny Depp, John Dillinger.
Yeah.
And once again, we're talking about true story, And I remember watching it. My husband and I went and saw it at the theater. And we get to the big climactic scene where he gets shot. So everybody, I'm pretty sure in the movie theater should know that Dillinger dies. The girl behind us goes, oh, Johnny, because he dies. I'm just like, are you kidding me? Did you not realize he was going to die?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, on that note, I thank you again for coming on, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me on. I hope that our conversation today is going to make a difference in the life of some member of your audience. And if it does, today's been a good day.
I'm sure it will.
Absolutely.
Terry's journey is one that, as I said on the podcast, I kind of can relate to what his wife and his daughter is going through, because when you love somebody and you care about them, it's hard to watch them go through something like this. However, his attitude is great. And I mean, my husband, his attitude at times was wonderful too. And those are the moments that you embrace and you're excited to be part of. Because as Terry said, ultimately, as the years pass, the good memories are what sticks with you, not so much the bad. You think about the positive things, the smile, the laugh, the joke, and you remember them. And that's important. So today, if you are with your family or if you lost somebody, understand that keep their memory alive, remember them, remember who they were, and keep them close if they're here. And if they're not, keep them in your thoughts and remember the love they had for you. We did talk about a lot of different things, and the biggest point here is life is a gift, and take each day and make the most of it, because you never know how much time you have. So embrace life and keep going. That's all any of us can do. So on that note, I wish you a great day. If you want to be a guest on the show, reach out to Donna at better2podcast.com. If you have a question or comment about the episode, you can do it there too, or you can leave a question or comment on our YouTube channel. If you want to leave a review, you can leave a review on Podchaser or on Apple Podcast. And if you want to subscribe, well, hit the subscribe button on YouTube or hit the subscribe button where you follow your favorite podcast. Anyway, I appreciate your day. Anyway, I appreciate your time. And as always, have a great day. And thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.